Norman Hermont there. Well, falling fertility rates mean nearly every country in the world could have shrinking populations by the end of the century, according to a new study. Researchers at the University of Washington predict the number of people on the planet will peak at 9.7 billion around 2064 before falling by almost a billion people by the end of the century. For more, I'm joined by Claire Madden, who is a social researcher. Claire, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you.
What's behind these falling fertility rates?
Well, the interesting study put out by the University of Washington said there's two main things behind this. One being greater access to modern contraception, the other being the education of girls and women. And so we've got people, women keeping in education for longer as well as their careers, which is having an impact on this.
So is the world prepared for such a decline?
Well, the report estimates that 183 out of the 195 countries in the world will not be able to maintain the current population by 2100. So no, I don't think the world is ready for that. I think it's a surprise to see the far-reaching impact of the majority of countries not being at a replacement level, which would need to be 2.1 total fertility rate of so babies per woman, and at the moment it's 2.4 globally, but it's expected to drop to just 1.7 by that year 2100.
And it was 4.7 in the 50s, so it's been declining somewhat. Before we look at the ramifications of that, I noticed in the report there were 23 nations, including Japan and Spain, who will see their populations halved by the end of the century. Which are the countries that are going to be most affected?
Yeah, that's right. So 23 countries are expected to halve by 2100 what their current population is. So you do have countries like Japan, Thailand, Italy, Spain, Portugal, who are in that category of expecting to at least halve their population in that time.
Huge social and economic implications for this. When we look at what sort of social change this might create, some of the other stats there was that the number of under fives will fall from 681 to just 401 by the end of the century. But at the other side of the life cycle, you've got 80-year-olds soaring from 141 million to 866 million by the end of the century. What sort of pressure will this put on society? What sort of societal change will we see as a result?
Yeah, that's right. So that's a six-fold increase in the over 80s and a decline in the number of children being born. So we're really inversing our population pyramid, where you normally, well, what we've had in Australia has been more younger people than older people. And so what we're going to see is a significant ageing population globally if this is the way things go. And that does put huge pressure on the economy. You've got a smaller ratio of people in the working age to the non-working population. So you've got to support all those people in your population. And as well as just not having the number of children coming through, we're going to depend on migration to keep that economic standard that we've known. And then that's going to be a challenge if the majority of countries aren't reaching that fertility rate.
Is that the only solution, migration? Because as we know, that's a sensitive topic for many countries. Most countries have migration caps.
Well, that's right. There have been other incentives, countries like Sweden trying to incentivise the increased fertility rate. They've managed to see it increase from 1.7 to 1.9. That's still under replacement level. Singapore's still sitting at 1.3. So there are government incentives, paternity leave, maternity leave, cash boosts. But of course, you need to. There's so many factors that affect this, and it won't just be a one policy that changes the fertility rates around the world.
Do you think there's appetites by governments around the world, but here particularly in Australia, if these numbers were to pan out, to address this issue?
Well, I do think it is interrelated in its complexity. Like we've seen, the role of women in the workplace has been increasing, which is obviously a really positive thing in many cases, and women having access to further education. And so you don't want to necessarily hamper that in then wanting to increase your natural increase. So it's certainly multifaceted. What is interesting here in Australia is we have been below replacement rates since 1976. And we've declined from, even if we go back about 10 years to the 2008 stats, we're at 2.02. Now we're down to 1.74. So we're really seeing that decline here. And for years, we've been depending on migration to see our population grow. So it is going to require looking at all parts of our population growth policy and what we want to really see into the future if we want to maintain a certain economic standard and the like.
Okay, some really interesting thoughts there. Claire Madden, thanks for your time.
Thanks.